The moment I heard Bob Harrison tell his daughter Emma that my position was hers for the taking, I realized he had no idea that the mortgage documents sitting in my home office made me the one person who could destroy his entire world. What he didn't know was that while he was busy playing nepotism games with my career, I had been quietly building a real estate investment portfolio that now included the deed of trust on his precious Westlake Hills mansion. In exactly 72 hours, I would walk back into TechFlow Solutions, not as Sarah Mitchell, the fired marketing director he thought he could discard, but as the woman who literally owned the roof over his head. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of TechFlow Solutions cast their familiar harsh glow across the 8th floor, as I made my way to what I thought would be another routine Friday morning meeting. The Austin skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown bustling with the energy of a city that never seemed to slow down. After 8 years at this company, I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of corporate life, the predictable cycles of quarterly reviews, budget meetings, and strategic planning sessions that marked the passage of time in the tech world. My heels clicked against the polished concrete floors as I walked past the open workspace where my marketing team was already deep into their morning routine. Jessica Rodriguez looked up from her computer and gave me a quick wave, her expression bright with the enthusiasm that had made her such a valuable addition to our department. At 28, she possessed the kind of creative energy that had helped transform our marketing campaigns from boring corporate speak into compelling narratives that actually resonated with our target audience. The marketing department had become my pride and joy during my tenure at TechFlow Solutions. When I first joined the company fresh out of business school with my MBA, the marketing function had been little more than an afterthought, a small team tasked with creating basic brochures and maintaining a barely functional website. Bob Harrison, the company's founder and CEO, had hired me with the vague instruction to make the marketing better, though he had shown little interest in understanding what that actually meant. Over the years, I had built something remarkable. Our team had grown from 3 people to 15. Our budget had increased by 400%. And most importantly, our campaigns had directly contributed to TechFlow's transformation from a small regional software company to a major player in the Austin tech scene. The lead generation programs I had developed were bringing in over 60% of our new business, and the brand positioning strategy I had implemented had helped us attract top talent from competitors across the industry. The conference room where Bob had asked me to meet him was located in the corner of the 8th floor, offering a panoramic view of the hill country that stretched beyond Austin's urban core. It was his favorite space for important conversations, the kind of room designed to impress clients and intimidate employees, with its expensive furniture and carefully curated artwork celebrating the company's achievements. I arrived a few minutes early, as was my habit, and settled into one of the leather chairs surrounding the imposing mahogany table. My laptop was open in front of me, loaded with the quarterly marketing report that I had spent the better part of the previous week preparing. The numbers were impressive, showing consistent growth across all key metrics and demonstrating the tangible value that marketing was delivering to the company's bottom line. Bob entered the room with his characteristic swagger, the kind of confident stride that had served him well during his rise from software developer to successful entrepreneur. At 52, he maintained the casual dress code that had become standard in Austin's tech community, favoring expensive jeans and designer polo shirts that managed to look both relaxed and professional. His graying hair was perfectly styled, and his expensive watch caught the morning light streaming through the windows. Following close behind him was Linda Chen, the HR director whose relationship with Bob had always struck me as uncomfortably close for a professional setting. Linda had joined TechFlow about 3 years ago, bringing with her a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and employee management strategies that prioritized the company's interests over individual concerns. Her presence at what I had assumed would be a routine marketing review immediately set off warning bells in my mind. "Good morning, Sarah," Bob said as he settled into the chair at the head of the table, his tone carrying a formal weight that was unusual for our typical interactions. "I hope you're ready for an important conversation about the future direction of our marketing efforts." Linda took the seat to his right, her tablet already open and her expression carefully neutral in the way that HR professionals master after years of delivering difficult news. The dynamic in the room felt wrong. charged with intention that I couldn't quite identify but that made my stomach tighten with anticipation. "I'm always ready to discuss marketing strategy," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the growing sense that this meeting was not going to unfold as I had expected. "The quarterly numbers are strong, and I have several recommendations for expanding our digital presence in the next fiscal year." Bob nodded absently, but I could see that his attention was elsewhere, focused on some agenda that he had not yet revealed. "Sarah, I want you to know that we really appreciate everything you've accomplished here at TechFlow. Your work has been instrumental in our growth over the past several years." The past tense usage sent a chill through me. In corporate speak, sentences that began with appreciation for past contributions rarely ended with good news about future opportunities. I had heard similar language used in exit interviews and termination meetings, the careful phrasing designed to soften the blow while protecting the company from potential legal challenges. "Thank you," I said carefully, unsure how to respond to what felt like the beginning of a conversation I was not prepared to have. "I'm excited about the opportunities ahead of us, especially with the new product launches we have planned for the third quarter." Linda cleared her throat and consulted her tablet, assuming the role of official record keeper that HR directors often played in sensitive conversations. "Sarah, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of our organizational structure, and we've identified some areas where we believe changes could improve our overall efficiency and effectiveness." The corporate euphemisms were piling up now, each one adding another layer of dread to the growing certainty that this meeting was not about marketing strategy or quarterly reviews. Organizational restructuring was the polite way of saying that people were about to lose their jobs, and efficiency improvements typically meant that someone's position was being eliminated or fundamentally altered. "I see," I replied, though I could feel my carefully maintained professional composure beginning to crack around the edges. "What kind of changes are you considering?" Bob leaned forward slightly, adopting the earnest expression that he typically reserved for difficult client conversations or board presentations. "Sarah, the truth is that we're looking at bringing in some fresh perspectives to our marketing leadership. The industry is changing rapidly, and we believe that new blood could help us stay ahead of the curve." Fresh perspectives was another corporate euphemism, one that typically meant that management had decided that current employees were no longer capable of meeting the company's evolving needs. The phrase was particularly insulting coming from Bob, considering that my marketing strategies had consistently outperformed industry benchmarks and had directly contributed to the company's most successful quarters on record. "What exactly does that mean for my role?" I asked, abandoning any pretense that this was a normal business conversation. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications that everyone in the room understood, but no one wanted to articulate directly. Linda consulted her tablet again, reading from what was obviously a prepared script designed to minimize legal exposure while delivering maximum impact. "Sarah, effective 2 weeks from today, we'll be transitioning the marketing director position to new leadership. We're prepared to offer you a generous severance package that reflects our appreciation for your contributions to the company." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though some part of my mind had been preparing for this possibility since the moment Linda had entered the room. 8 years of building something meaningful, of creating value and driving results, was being dismissed with corporate platitudes and bureaucratic efficiency. "You're firing me," I said, the blunt statement cutting through the layers of corporate speak that they had been using to avoid direct confrontation. There was no point in pretending that this was anything other than termination, regardless of how they chose to package it. "We'd prefer to think of it as a transition," Bob replied, his tone taking on a slightly defensive edge. "This isn't about your performance, Sarah. It's about positioning the company for future growth with leadership that can take us to the next level." The irony of his statement was overwhelming. My performance had been exemplary by every measurable standard, and the growth he was referencing had been largely driven by the marketing programs I had developed and implemented. The suggestion that I was somehow inadequate to lead the department I had built from nothing was both insulting and demonstrably false. "Who is this new leadership you're bringing in?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. TechFlow wasn't large enough to conduct extensive external searches for senior positions, and the timeline suggested that this decision had been made quickly, without the thorough evaluation process that such an important hire would typically require. Bob and Linda exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicions before he answered. "We're promoting from within, Emma Harrison will be taking over the marketing director role. She brings a fresh perspective and innovative ideas that we believe will serve the company well. Emma Harrison, Bob's 26-year-old daughter, who had graduated from the University of Texas just 4 months ago with a degree in communications and exactly 0 professional experience in marketing, software, or corporate leadership. The nepotism was so blatant that it would have been laughable if it weren't destroying my career in the process. "Your daughter," I said, making no effort to hide my disbelief. "You're firing me to hire your daughter, who has never worked a day in marketing in her life. Emma has a lot of great ideas about social media and connecting with younger demographics," Bob replied, his defensive tone growing more pronounced. "She understands the digital landscape in ways that could really benefit our outreach efforts." The suggestion that Emma's social media habits qualified her to lead a 15-person marketing department with a multi-million-dollar budget was so absurd that I almost laughed, but the reality of my situation was setting in. And laughter was the last thing I felt capable of producing. "Bob, I've increased lead generation by 300% over the past 2 years. Our conversion rates are the highest in the industry. The brand positioning campaign I developed has been featured in 3 major trade publications as a model for other companies to follow." "You're really going to throw all of that away for nepotism?" Linda stepped in before Bob could respond, her HR training kicking in to manage what was clearly becoming a more confrontational conversation than they had anticipated. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah, we understand that this news is disappointing. That's why we're prepared to offer you 6 months of severance pay, continuation of your health benefits for the same period, and positive references for your job search." 6 months of severance was generous by industry standards, but it felt like an insult given the circumstances. They were essentially trying to buy my silence and compliance with what was obviously an unethical business decision, driven by personal relationships rather than professional qualifications. "This is illegal," I said, grasping for some way to fight back against what felt like an overwhelming assault on everything I had worked to build. "You can't fire someone to make room for your family member. That's textbook nepotism and discrimination." Linda shook her head with the patient expression of someone who had anticipated this argument. "Sarah, Texas is an at-will employment state. We can terminate any employee for any reason, as long as it's not based on protected class status. Family relationships aren't a protected class, and we're not required to maintain any particular employee simply because they've been here for a certain length of time." The legal reality was crushing. Texas employment law heavily favored employers, and while nepotism might be ethically questionable, it wasn't necessarily illegal in the way that discrimination based on race, gender, or age would be. Bob had the legal right to hire his daughter, regardless of her qualifications or the impact on other employees. "What about my team?" I asked, thinking about Jessica and the 14 other people who had trusted me to lead them and protect their interests within the corporate structure. "Are you planning to fire all of them too, or just the person who built the department they work in?" "Your team is valuable," Bob assured me, though his tone suggested that their job security was far from guaranteed. "Emma will have the opportunity to evaluate the current structure and make whatever changes she believes are necessary to optimize performance." The translation was clear. Emma would be given carte blanche to remake the marketing department according to her inexperienced preferences, regardless of the impact on established processes, client relationships, or employee morale. The people I had hired and mentored would be subject to the whims of someone who had never managed anything more complex than her college sorority's social media accounts. "I need some time to process this," I said, recognizing that continuing the conversation would only lead to further humiliation and frustration. "When do you need an answer about the severance package?" "We'd like to have everything finalized by Monday," Linda replied, consulting her tablet for the timeline they had obviously prepared in advance. "That will give us time to make the necessary announcements and begin the transition process." The weekend to decide whether to accept their terms or fight a battle I had little chance of winning. The math was simple and brutal. I could take their money and leave quietly, or I could refuse and face the prospect of unemployment, with no severance, no benefits, and a former employer who would likely provide negative references to sabotage my future job prospects. As I gathered my laptop and prepared to leave the conference room, Bob made one final statement that revealed just how little he understood about the situation he had created. "Sarah, I hope you understand that this isn't personal. It's just business. And sometimes businesses need to make tough decisions to stay competitive." The casual dismissal of 8 years of my professional life as just business was the final insult in a conversation that had been filled with them. Bob genuinely seemed to believe that his decision was reasonable, and that I should accept it gracefully as part of the natural order of corporate life. I left the conference room without responding, walking past the marketing team that would soon be learning that their department was being handed over to someone with no qualifications beyond her family connections. Jessica looked up as I passed her desk, her expression shifting from friendly curiosity to concern as she registered whatever she saw in my face. "Everything okay, Sarah?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of genuine worry that reminded me why I had worked so hard to create a positive culture within our department. "We'll talk Monday," I replied, unable to bring myself to explain what had just happened. The weekend stretched ahead of me like a prison sentence, filled with the need to process what had occurred and decide how to respond to circumstances that felt completely beyond my control. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt endless, each floor counting down like a timer marking the end of my professional identity at TechFlow Solutions. The woman who entered that conference room as a successful marketing director was gone, replaced by someone whose career had been casualty of nepotism and corporate politics. As I sat in my car in the parking garage, staring at the concrete walls that had become as familiar as my own home after 8 years of daily commutes, the full weight of what had happened began to settle over me. Bob Harrison had just destroyed my career to benefit his daughter, treating my professional accomplishments as disposable obstacles to his family's advancement. But as I drove home through the Austin traffic past the familiar landmarks that marked my daily routine, a different kind of thought began to emerge. Bob Harrison had made a serious mistake in underestimating me. He saw me as just another employee who could be discarded when convenient. Someone who would take his severance money and disappear quietly into the background of his corporate memory. What he didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had resources and connections that extended far beyond the walls of TechFlow Solutions. What he didn't know was that his casual dismissal of my value was about to become the biggest miscalculation of his professional life. The drive home to Cedar Park gave me time to let the initial shock and anger transform into something more useful. Bob Harrison wanted to play family games with professional consequences. He was about to learn that some games have rules he never knew existed, and some players have advantages that aren't visible until the moment they choose to use them. My house came into view as I turned onto our quiet suburban street, the place where David and I had built our life together while pursuing our respective careers in Austin's competitive tech scene. It was also the place where I kept my home office, and in that office were documents that could change everything about the power dynamic between Bob Harrison and me. As I pulled into the driveway, I realized that the weekend ahead wouldn't be about deciding whether to accept his severance package. It would be about planning exactly how to turn his moment of triumph into the beginning of his worst nightmare. David was in the kitchen when I walked through the front door, his laptop open on the breakfast bar as he worked from home on what he had told me was a particularly challenging coding project. The familiar sight of him hunched over his computer, coffee mug within easy reach, and his dark hair falling across his forehead in the way that always made me smile, should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like I was viewing our normal life through a window, seeing something that belonged to a different version of myself, who still had a career and a future that made sense. "Hey babe," he said without looking up from his screen, his fingers continuing to move across the keyboard in the rapid-fire pattern that meant he was deep in a complex programming sequence. "How did the meeting with Bob go? Are you guys moving forward with that new campaign strategy you were telling me about?" The question hit me like a physical blow, a reminder of how quickly everything had changed and how unprepared I was to explain what had happened. Just this morning, I had been excited about presenting my quarterly results and discussing expansion plans for the marketing department. Now I was unemployed, cast aside for a recent college graduate whose only qualification was sharing DNA with the CEO. I set my purse down on the counter with more force than necessary, the sound finally drawing David's attention away from his coding project. He looked up with the expression of mild curiosity that shifted to concern as he registered whatever he saw in my face. Sarah, what's wrong? You look like someone just told you the building was on fire. Worse than that, I replied, my voice coming out flat and emotionless despite the turmoil churning inside me. Bob fired me. Effective in 2 weeks. He's giving my job to Emma. David's expression went through several rapid changes as he processed what I had just told him. Confusion came first, followed by disbelief, and finally settling into the kind of anger that made his jaw clench and his hands form involuntary fists. He what? David closed his laptop with a sharp click and stood up from the breakfast bar, his full attention now focused on me. Emma? As in his daughter Emma? The one who just graduated college and has never worked anywhere except that internship at her uncle's real estate office? That's the one. Fresh perspectives, they called it. New blood to help the company stay competitive in the rapidly changing digital landscape. The bitter sarcasm in my voice seemed to fuel David's anger even more. He began pacing around the kitchen island, his movements sharp and agitated in the way that happened when he encountered problems that couldn't be solved with logic and careful programming. This is insane, Sarah. You built that marketing department from nothing. You've brought in millions of dollars in revenue. They can't just throw you away because Bob wants to give his kid a job. Texas employment law says they can, I replied, sinking onto one of the bar stools and letting the weight of the day settle onto my shoulders. Linda made sure to explain that to me very clearly. At-will employment means they can fire me for any reason that isn't specifically protected, and nepotism isn't discrimination in the legal sense. David stopped pacing and turned to face me directly, his expression showing the kind of focused intensity that I had learned to recognize when he was approaching a problem from a new angle. Okay, so maybe they can do it legally, but that doesn't mean we have to just accept it. There have to be options. Wrongful termination lawsuits, employment discrimination claims, something. The desperate hope in his voice made my heart ache. David was a problem solver by nature, someone who approached challenges with the same methodical thinking that made him an excellent software engineer. The idea that some problems couldn't be fixed with the right combination of effort and strategy was foreign to his worldview. I already thought about that during the drive home. Without proof that the firing was based on gender, age, or some other protected characteristic, we don't have a discrimination case. And even if we could prove that Bob's decision was purely nepotistic, which it obviously was, that's not illegal in Texas, it's just unethical. David resumed his pacing, this time with the slower, more deliberate movement that meant he was thinking through possibilities rather than just reacting emotionally. What about the severance package? Did they offer you anything decent? 6 months of salary and benefits continuation. Plus positive references, though I'm not sure how much Bob's word is worth in the industry after this. 6 months isn't nothing, David said, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as me. That gives us time to figure out next steps. You're incredibly talented, Sarah. Any company would be lucky to have you. His confidence in my abilities was touching, but it also revealed how little he understood about the reality of being a senior marketing executive in Austin's competitive tech scene. Word traveled fast in our industry, and Bob Harrison carried significant influence within the local business community. If he chose to sabotage my reputation, either through subtle comments or strategic silence, when potential employers called for references, my job search could become infinitely more difficult. It's not just about finding another job, I said, trying to help him understand the broader implications of what had happened. Bob has connections throughout the Austin tech community. If he decides to make my life difficult, he can effectively blacklist me from any position worth having. Then we'll move, David replied without hesitation. Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. Hell, we'll go to California or New York if we have to. Your skills are valuable anywhere. The immediate willingness to uproot our entire life for my career was exactly the kind of response I should have expected from David. He had always been supportive of my professional ambitions, even when they required sacrifices on his part. But the idea of running away from Austin, abandoning the life we had built together, felt like letting Bob Harrison win in the most complete way possible. I don't want to run away, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. This is our home. Our friends are here, your job is here, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let Bob Harrison drive me out of town because he wants to play favorites with his incompetent daughter. David stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, something that combined admiration with concern. Okay, so what are you thinking? Because that tone in your voice suggests you have something specific in mind. The question forced me to confront the thoughts that had been building during my drive home, the shift from victim to strategist that had been occurring below the surface of my conscious mind. Bob Harrison thought he held all the power in our relationship, that he could dispose of me without consequences because I was just another employee with no recourse beyond accepting his severance package and disappearing quietly. He was about to learn how wrong he was about that assumption. "I need to show you something," I said, standing up from the bar stool and heading toward the home office that David and I shared for our respective side projects and personal business. "It's in my investment files." David followed me down the hallway, his curiosity evident in the way he stayed close behind me as I unlocked the filing cabinet where I kept the documents related to my real estate investment activities. The filing system was meticulous, organized by property type and acquisition date, a reflection of the same attention to detail that had made me successful in marketing. "Sarah, what investment files? You've never mentioned any real estate investments." His confusion was understandable. I had been deliberately discreet about my property investment activities, not because I was trying to hide anything from David, but because I had wanted to build something substantial before bringing him into the planning process. The real estate market in Austin had been volatile enough that I hadn't wanted to worry him with the ups and downs of property speculation until I had something concrete to show for my efforts. I found the folder I was looking for and pulled it from the filing cabinet, feeling the weight of the documents that could change everything about my relationship with Bob Harrison. The tab was labeled Harrison Property Trust, and inside were mortgage documents, insurance papers, and financial records that told a story Bob had no idea existed. "Remember about 3 years ago when I started talking about diversifying our investments beyond just retirement accounts and savings?" I said, setting the folder on the desk and opening it to reveal the contents. "I told you I was researching real estate opportunities in the Austin market." David nodded, his expression showing that he remembered the conversations, but was still unclear about where this was leading. "You said you were looking at rental properties as a way to build long-term wealth, but you never mentioned actually buying anything." "I did buy something," I replied, pulling out the mortgage document that had Bob Harrison's signature at the bottom of the last page. "Several somethings, actually. But this one is going to be particularly interesting to you." David took the document from my hands and began reading, his engineering mind automatically processing the legal language and financial details with the same systematic approach he brought to debugging complex code. His eyes moved down the page methodically until they reached the property address, at which point his expression shifted from curiosity to complete bewilderment. "Wait, this is Bob's house," he said, looking up from the document with wide eyes. "This is his actual address in Westlake Hills. Sarah, how do you own Bob Harrison's mortgage?" The question I had been hoping he would ask, the one that would allow me to explain the chain of events that had put me in a position of incredible leverage over the man who had just destroyed my career. The story was complex, involving real estate investment strategies, mortgage market dynamics, and a series of fortunate coincidences that had aligned to create an opportunity I never could have planned. "It started with Kevin Park," I explained, settling into my desk chair and gesturing for David to take the seat across from me. "You remember Kevin from that party at Tyler's house last year. He works as a mortgage broker specializing in high-end properties." David nodded, his memory clearly placing Kevin as the gregarious guy who had spent most of that party talking about the Austin real estate market and the opportunities available for investors willing to think creatively about property acquisition strategies. Kevin and I stayed in touch after that party because I was genuinely interested in learning about real estate investment. He started sending me information about distressed properties, foreclosure opportunities, and something called mortgage note investing that I had never heard of before. Mortgage note investing was a relatively obscure strategy that involved purchasing the debt obligations secured by real estate rather than buying the properties themselves. When a homeowner took out a mortgage, that mortgage became a financial instrument that could be bought and sold like any other investment product. Investors who purchased mortgage notes became the creditors, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with holding someone else's debt. Kevin explained that most people don't realize their mortgages can be sold to private investors, I continued, watching David's expression as he began to understand the implications of what I was telling him. Banks sell mortgages to other financial institutions all the time, but individual investors can also participate in that market if they know how to navigate the process. The opportunity to purchase Bob's mortgage had come about through a series of circumstances that I could never have orchestrated deliberately. Bob had refinanced his Westlake Hills mansion about 18 months ago, taking advantage of favorable interest rates to reduce his monthly payments and access some of his accumulated equity for investment purposes. What Bob hadn't realized was that his new mortgage had been packaged with several other high-value loans and sold to a private investment group that specialized in premium residential debt. That investment group had later decided to liquidate some of their Austin area holdings, creating an opportunity for individual investors to purchase specific mortgage notes at competitive prices. Kevin brought me the opportunity because he knew I was looking for investment properties in the Austin market, and Bob's mortgage represented exactly the kind of stable, high-value debt that could provide steady returns with minimal risk. The homeowner had excellent credit, substantial income, and significant equity in a property located in one of Austin's most desirable neighborhoods. "So you bought Bob's mortgage without knowing it was Bob's mortgage," David said, his engineering mind working through the logical sequence of events. "Exactly. The investment opportunity was presented to me as a $2.8 million mortgage note secured by a luxury property in Westlake Hills. The borrower's name was listed as Harrison Property Trust, which didn't immediately connect to Bob in my mind because it was a trust name rather than his personal name. The truth was that I had been attracted to the investment primarily because of the numbers. The mortgage carried a competitive interest rate, the property value provided substantial security for the loan amount, and the borrower's financial profile suggested virtually no risk of default. It had seemed like an ideal addition to my growing real estate investment portfolio. "When did you realize it was Bob's house?" David asked, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and concern about the implications of what he was learning. "About 6 months ago," I replied, remembering the moment of recognition that had transformed a routine investment into something much more personally significant. I was reviewing my quarterly investment reports when I noticed that the property address looked familiar. I drove by just to confirm, and sure enough, there was Bob's Tesla in the driveway of the house that secures the mortgage I own. The discovery had been surreal, like finding out that random chance had handed me a weapon I never knew I needed. At the time, my relationship with Bob had been professional and generally positive. The knowledge that I held his mortgage had been interesting, but not particularly relevant to my daily life or career planning. That had changed dramatically this morning when Bob had decided that my 8 years of service and proven results were less valuable than his daughter's inexperience and family connections. David leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the kind of amazement that came with realizing that reality was stranger than anything he could have imagined. "Sarah, do you understand what this means? You're not just some employee he can push around. You literally own his house." "Not exactly," I corrected, though I appreciated his enthusiasm about the strategic possibilities. "I own the mortgage, which means I'm his creditor. Bob still owns the house, but he owes me $2.8 million, and if he defaults on his payments, I have the legal right to foreclose on the property." The distinction was important, but the practical implications were exactly what David was beginning to understand. Bob Harrison might be the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, but in the context of real estate debt, I was the one with power over his financial security and lifestyle. "Has he ever missed a payment?" David asked, his mind clearly working through the various scenarios that my mortgage ownership might enable. "Never. Bob's been a model borrower, making his payments on time every month since I purchased the note. But that's about to become much more interesting, now that our professional relationship has taken such a dramatic turn." David stood up and began pacing again. But this time his movement had the excited energy of someone who had discovered an unexpected solution to a seemingly impossible problem. "Sarah, this changes everything. Bob thinks he has all the power because he controls your job, but you have leverage over something much more important to him than TechFlow Solutions." The house in Westlake Hills wasn't just Bob's residence. It was a symbol of his success and status within Austin's business community. The 4,500 square foot mansion with its infinity pool, three-car garage, and panoramic view of the hill country represented everything he had worked to achieve since founding TechFlow Solutions 15 years ago. More importantly, Bob's lifestyle was built around the assumption that his mortgage payments were a routine business expense, automatically deducted from his account each month without requiring any thought or attention on his part. The idea that his former employee now controlled that debt would be psychologically devastating even if I never took any action based on that knowledge. But I wasn't planning to simply let Bob know about our new creditor-debtor relationship and leave it at that. The man who had just destroyed my career for his daughter's benefit was about to learn that some decisions carry consequences he never anticipated. I spent the rest of that Friday evening pulling together every document related to Bob's came withholding his debt. David helped me research the specific procedures for mortgage note holders in Texas, discovering that my rights as Bob's creditor were more extensive than either of us had initially realized. The weekend that followed was a blur of strategic planning and emotional processing. The initial shock and anger of being fired had transformed into something much more focused and determined. Bob Harrison wanted to play family games with professional consequences, but he had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. By Sunday evening, I had developed a plan that would demonstrate to Bob exactly how costly his nepotistic decision was going to be. The woman he had dismissed as a disposable employee was about to become the most important person in his financial life, and the daughter he had hired to replace me was going to learn that some positions come with responsibilities that extend far beyond updating social media accounts. David found me in the home office Sunday night, surrounded by legal documents and financial records that told the story of how a routine investment decision had become the foundation for the most sophisticated revenge strategy I had ever contemplated. "Are you really going to do this?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern for what I was planning. "Bob Harrison just made the biggest mistake of his professional life," I replied, looking up from the mortgage documents that would soon become Bob's worst nightmare. "He thinks he can discard people without consequences, but he's about to learn that some people have more power than he ever imagined." The transformation from victim to creditor was complete. Bob's moment of triumph in firing me had set in motion a chain of events that would make him question every assumption he had ever held about power, control, and the people he had taken for granted. Monday morning was going to be very interesting indeed. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a weekend of life-changing realizations. I woke up before my alarm, my mind already racing with the carefully constructed plan that would transform Bob Harrison's day from routine corporate management into a lesson about the hidden costs of nepotism. The woman who had left TechFlow Solutions on Friday as a discarded employee was about to return as something far more dangerous. I chose my outfit with the same precision that I had once applied to major client presentations. The navy blue blazer and tailored slacks projected professional authority, while the pearl necklace David had given me for our anniversary added a touch of understated elegance that suggested someone who belonged in boardrooms and executive meetings. Every detail was calculated to send a specific message about confidence and capability. The drive to TechFlow Solutions felt different than it had on countless previous mornings. Instead of the familiar routine of arriving for another day of building marketing campaigns and managing team dynamics, I was approaching the building as someone with a hidden agenda and resources that extended far beyond anything my former colleagues could imagine. Kevin Park had agreed to meet me at Hill Country Grounds, the coffee shop located 3 blocks from TechFlow's downtown Austin office. The location was strategic, close enough to the office building to make my presence in the area seem natural, but private enough to conduct the kind of conversation that would prepare me for what was about to unfold. Kevin was already waiting when I arrived, his laptop open and several manila folders spread across the small table he had claimed near the back of the coffee shop. At 41, he possessed the kind of confident demeanor that came from years of successfully navigating complex real estate transactions and building relationships with high-net-worth clients throughout the Austin area. "Sarah," he said as I approached the table, his expression showing genuine concern mixed with curiosity about why I had requested this urgent meeting. "You sounded pretty intense on the phone yesterday. What's going on with the Harrison mortgage that couldn't wait until our regular quarterly review?" I settled into the chair across from him and accepted the coffee he had ordered for me, grateful for the caffeine and the moment to organize my thoughts before diving into the explanation that would bring Kevin into my planning process. Bob Harrison fired me on Friday, I said without preamble, watching Kevin's expression shift from casual interest to shocked attention. He's giving my position to his daughter, who just graduated from college and has zero professional experience in marketing or anything else remotely relevant to running a corporate department. Kevin's eyebrows shot up as he processed what I had just told him. The Harrison who owns the mortgage note you purchased? Your former boss fired you to hire his own daughter? That's exactly right. And now I need to understand every single right and option I have as his mortgage holder, because Bob Harrison just picked a fight with the wrong person. Kevin leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the kind of amazement that came with realizing that routine business relationships could suddenly become much more personal and complicated. Sarah, are you thinking about what I think you're thinking about? I'm thinking that Bob Harrison made his decision based on the assumption that I'm powerless to respond in any meaningful way. He sees me as just another disposable employee who will take his severance money and disappear quietly from his life. He has no idea that I own $2.8 million of his debt and all the legal rights that come with that position. Kevin pulled one of the manila folders closer and opened it to reveal the comprehensive file he maintained on every mortgage note his clients owned. The Harrison property documentation was extensive, reflecting the complexity of the loan structure and the various legal protections that secured my investment. Okay, let's talk about what you can actually do, Kevin said, his tone shifting into the professional mode he used when discussing serious financial matters with clients. As the mortgage note holder, you have specific rights that are defined both by the original loan agreement and by Texas property law. He pulled out the master promissory note that Bob had signed when refinancing his Westlake Hills mansion, pointing to the sections that outlined the borrower's obligations and the lender's remedies in case of default or breach of contract. Bob's mortgage has a current principal balance of $2.8 million, with monthly payments of $18,500, including principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. The loan is secured by the property, which means you have the right to foreclose if he defaults on his payment obligations. The numbers were substantial enough to represent a significant portion of Bob's monthly expenses, even with his CEO salary and bonus structure. Missing even a single payment would immediately trigger late fees and potentially impact his credit rating throughout the financial community. But he's never missed a payment, I said, acknowledging the challenge of using traditional default procedures when the borrower had been consistently meeting his obligations. Kevin nodded, but his expression suggested that payment history was only one aspect of the mortgage relationship that could become relevant to my situation. That's true, but there are other provisions in the loan agreement that give you additional rights as the note holder. For example, you have the right to inspect the property annually to ensure that it's being properly maintained and that the insurance coverage remains adequate to protect your security interest. The inspection right was something I hadn't considered, but it opened up interesting possibilities for creating leverage and psychological pressure. Bob's home was his private sanctuary, the place where he could escape from the demands of running TechFlow Solutions and enjoy the lifestyle that his success had made possible. The knowledge that his former employee could legally demand access to inspect his property would be deeply unsettling. More importantly, Kevin continued, consulting another section of the loan documentation, you have the right to be notified of any proposed changes to the property, including renovations, additions, or modifications that could affect the value of your security. And if Bob ever decides to sell the property, you have the right of first refusal to either approve the sale terms or exercise your option to accelerate the loan balance. The acceleration clause was particularly interesting because it gave me the ability to demand immediate payment of the entire remaining loan balance under certain circumstances. While Bob's regular payment history wouldn't trigger that right, there were other events that could justify acceleration, including any material change in his financial circumstances or business relationships. What about if his employment situation changes? I asked, thinking about the broader implications of the power struggle that was about to unfold at TechFlow Solutions. If Bob's position as CEO becomes unstable, does that affect his loan status? Kevin consulted the original credit application that Bob had submitted when applying for the mortgage refinancing. His qualification for this loan amount was based partly on his role as CEO of TechFlow Solutions and the income stability that position provided. If his employment status changed significantly, that could be considered a material change in financial circumstances that would allow you to review the loan terms. The possibility was intriguing, but it also revealed the potential scope of what I was contemplating. By challenging Bob's decision to fire me, I might create circumstances that could justify accelerating his mortgage, demanding immediate payment of nearly $3 million that he almost certainly didn't have readily available in liquid assets. "There's something else you should know," Kevin said, his voice taking on the careful tone he used when discussing sensitive legal matters. "The mortgage includes a clause about borrower conduct that could be relevant to your situation. If Bob engages in any business practices that could damage his reputation or financial standing in ways that might affect his ability to service the debt, that could potentially trigger a review of the loan terms." Business practices that could damage his reputation. The phrase seemed tailor-made for the situation Bob had created by firing me for nepotistic reasons, especially if his decision resulted in negative publicity or professional consequences that reflected poorly on his judgment and leadership capabilities. "Kevin," I said, feeling the pieces of my strategy clicking into place with satisfying precision, "I think Bob Harrison is about to discover that some employment decisions carry consequences that extend far beyond the workplace." We spent the next hour reviewing every aspect of my rights and options as Bob's mortgage holder, creating a comprehensive understanding of the legal and financial leverage I possessed. Kevin's expertise in mortgage law and real estate transactions proved invaluable in identifying strategies I never would have considered on my own. The plan that emerged from our conversation was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. Rather than confronting Bob directly about his nepotistic decision, I would exercise my legitimate rights as his creditor in ways that would demonstrate the hidden costs of underestimating the people he chose to discard. By the time I left Hill Country Grounds, I had a clear roadmap for the next phase of my response to Bob's decision. The first step would be gathering intelligence about Emma's transition into my former role and the early signs of dysfunction that her inexperience was likely to create within the marketing department. I drove past TechFlow Solutions slowly, observing the familiar building from the perspective of someone who no longer belonged inside, but who maintained significant influence over one of its key executives. The parking garage where I had spent countless mornings and evenings transitioning between home and work life now looked like territory that belonged to my past, though not in the way Bob Harrison imagined. My next stop was a visit to Tyler Johnson, David's colleague and one of the few people at TechFlow who had maintained friendly relationships across different departments. Tyler worked in the software development division, but his position required regular coordination with marketing on product launches and technical documentation projects. Tyler had agreed to meet me for lunch at a restaurant near the office, ostensibly to catch up on personal news, but actually to provide me with insider information about how Emma's transition was affecting the marketing department's operations. "Sarah," Tyler said as he joined me at the table I had reserved, his expression showing genuine sympathy for what he assumed was my unfortunate situation. "David told me what happened on Friday. I can't believe Bob would do something so blatantly nepotistic, especially after all the success you've had with the marketing programs." "It's definitely been a surprise," I replied, maintaining the tone of someone who was disappointed but resigned to circumstances beyond her control. "How are things going with the transition? Has Emma started making changes to the department structure?" Tyler's expression shifted to something between amusement and concern, as he considered how to answer my question diplomatically. "Let's just say that Emma has some very different ideas about how marketing should function. She called an all-hands meeting this morning to introduce her vision for modernizing our approach to customer engagement." The phrase "modernizing our approach" was clearly Tyler's polite way of describing what had probably been a presentation filled with buzzwords and social media strategies that demonstrated Emma's fundamental misunderstanding of enterprise-level marketing challenges. "Did she keep the existing team structure intact?" I asked, thinking about Jessica and the other professionals who had worked so hard to build something meaningful within the marketing department. "That's where it gets interesting," Tyler replied, his tone suggesting that the changes had been more dramatic than anyone had anticipated. "Emma announced that she's restructuring the entire department around what she called authentic digital storytelling. Half the team is being reassigned to social media content creation, and the other half is being tasked with influencer outreach and community building." The strategic implications of Emma's restructuring were immediately clear to me. The sophisticated lead generation programs and data-driven campaign strategies that had driven TechFlow's marketing success were being abandoned in favor of trendy social media tactics that might work for consumer brands but were completely inappropriate for enterprise software marketing. What about the existing client campaigns and quarterly planning cycles? I asked, knowing that Emma's inexperience would make it impossible for her to understand the complexity of managing multiple concurrent marketing initiatives with different timelines and success metrics. Tyler's expression became more serious as he realized that his answer would reveal the extent of the dysfunction that Emma's leadership was already creating. She told the team that traditional campaign structures are too rigid for the modern marketplace. Everything is being shifted to what she calls agile content development, with real-time audience feedback integration. The translation was obvious. Emma had no understanding of how to manage long-term marketing strategies or maintain the consistent messaging that enterprise clients expected from their software vendors. The marketing department I had built over 8 years was being dismantled by someone who confused personal social media experience with professional marketing expertise. How is Jessica handling all of this? I asked, genuinely concerned about my former assistant and the impact that Emma's incompetence would have on her career development. Jessica's been trying to be diplomatic, but I can tell she's frustrated. She asked Emma about the Q3 product launch campaign you had been developing, and Emma told her that product launches are outdated marketing concepts that don't align with customer-centric storytelling approaches. The Q3 product launch campaign represented 6 months of strategic planning and cross-departmental coordination, designed to introduce TechFlow's most significant software update in 3 years. The campaign included comprehensive market research, competitive analysis, pricing strategy, and integrated communications across multiple channels. Emma's dismissal of that work as outdated demonstrated exactly how dangerous her inexperience would be for the company's revenue goals. Tyler, I said, leaning forward slightly to emphasize the importance of what I was about to ask, I need you to keep me informed about how these changes are affecting the department's performance. Not because I'm trying to undermine Emma, but because I'm concerned about the people who still work there and the impact on TechFlow's business results. Of course, Tyler replied, his expression showing that he understood the broader implications of what was happening. David mentioned that you're exploring your options for responding to the situation. Is there anything I can do to help? Just keep your eyes open and let me know if things get as bad as I think they're going to get. Emma's inexperience isn't her fault, but the consequences of putting her in charge of a complex marketing operation are going to be significant. Our lunch conversation confirmed what I had suspected about Emma's transition into my former role. Her lack of professional experience was already creating problems that would cascade through the marketing department and eventually impact TechFlow's overall business performance. More importantly, her decisions were providing me with additional justification for the actions I was planning to take. After lunch, I drove to a print shop that specialized in professional document preparation and legal formatting. The materials I needed for the next phase of my plan required the kind of official presentation that would emphasize the serious legal and financial implications of Bob's mortgage obligations. The documents I had prepared detailed my rights as Bob's mortgage holder, including the specific circumstances that would allow me to demand property inspections, review financial disclosures, and potentially accelerate the loan balance. Each page was formatted with the kind of legal precision that would make it clear to Bob that his former employee had become someone with significant power over his personal financial security. The final element of my preparation involved scheduling a meeting with Bob under circumstances that would allow me to present my new position of leverage without the interference of HR representatives or corporate legal counsel. The setting needed to be private enough for a frank conversation about our changed relationship, but professional enough to emphasize the business implications of what I was proposing. I called Bob's office directly, knowing that his assistant would recognize my voice and that Bob would likely agree to meet with me under the assumption that I wanted to discuss the terms of my severance package or negotiate a more amicable transition from the company. TechFlow Solutions, Bob Harrison's office. Bob's assistant answered in the professionally cheerful tone that executive assistants perfected for screening calls and managing calendars. Hi Jennifer, this is Sarah Mitchell. I was wondering if Bob might have some time available this week to discuss a business matter that's come up since our meeting on Friday. The phrase business matter was deliberately vague, designed to suggest that our conversation would focus on professional rather than personal issues. Jennifer's tone shifted to the more formal register she used when scheduling sensitive meetings that might require additional discretion. Let me check his calendar, Sarah. He has an opening Wednesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, if that works for you. Should I reserve the conference room, or would you prefer to meet in his office? His office would be perfect, I replied, knowing that the private setting would be more conducive to the kind of direct conversation that was about to change everything about Bob's understanding of our relationship. Wednesday afternoon seemed like the ideal timing for revealing my position as Bob's mortgage holder. It would give Emma enough time to create additional problems within the marketing department, providing more evidence of the poor judgment that Bob had exercised in his hiring decision, while still allowing me to act quickly enough to maximize the psychological impact of my revelation. I spent Tuesday finalizing my documentation and rehearsing the conversation that would transform Bob Harrison's week from routine corporate management into a crash course in the hidden vulnerabilities that successful people often never recognize until someone chooses to exploit them. The woman who had been fired on Friday for inconvenient competence was about to become the most important creditor in Bob Harrison's financial life, and the daughter he had hired to replace her was going to discover that some positions require skills that can't be learned through social media tutorials and college communications classes. Wednesday afternoon couldn't arrive soon enough. Wednesday afternoon arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed to heighten every detail of the world around me. The Austin skyline stretched endlessly beyond the windows of TechFlow Solutions as I made my way through the lobby that had once felt like a second home, but now seemed like enemy territory that I was infiltrating with a carefully concealed weapon. The security guard at the front desk, Marcus Williams, looked up with the same friendly expression he had worn for the past 5 years of our daily interactions. His genuine smile carried no awareness that the woman approaching his desk was no longer the marketing director, who used to hurry past each morning with coffee in hand, and her mind focused on the day's campaigns and client meetings. "Afternoon, Ms. Mitchell," Marcus said as he prepared a visitor's badge with the automatic efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of similar requests. "Mr. Harrison's expecting you in his office. Should I let Jennifer know you're on your way up?" "That would be perfect, Marcus, thank you." The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt both endless and instantaneous, time seeming to stretch and contract as my mind ran through the final preparations for what was about to unfold. The manila folder in my briefcase contained documents that would fundamentally alter Bob Harrison's understanding of power, control, and the people he had taken for granted throughout his rise to corporate success. Jennifer greeted me with the same professional warmth she had always shown, though I could detect a subtle shift in her demeanor that suggested she was unsure how to navigate the social dynamics of interacting with someone who had recently been terminated by her boss. "Sarah, it's good to see you," Jennifer said as she stood from her desk outside Bob's corner office. "Bob's finishing up a call, but he should be ready for you in just a moment. Can I get you anything while you wait?" "I'm fine, thank you." "How has the transition been going with Emma taking over the marketing department?" The question was designed to gather last-minute intelligence about the dysfunction that Emma's inexperience was creating, but Jennifer's diplomatic training kicked in immediately. Her expression shifted to the carefully neutral mask that executive assistants wore when discussing sensitive personnel matters. "I'm sure Emma is settling in well," Jennifer replied in the tone of someone who had been coached to avoid commenting on management decisions. "She's certainly brought a lot of energy and fresh ideas to the department." The phrase "fresh ideas" was clearly a euphemism for chaos and inexperience, but before I could probe further, Bob's office door opened and he emerged with the confident stride that had carried him through 15 years of building TechFlow Solutions from a small startup into one of Austin's most successful tech companies. "Sarah," Bob said as he approached with his hand extended for a professional handshake, "thanks for coming in today. I hope we can work out the details of your transition in a way that works for everyone involved." His tone carried the condescending warmth of someone who believed he was being generous with a former employee who should be grateful for his consideration. The assumption that I was there to negotiate the terms of my departure revealed exactly how little Bob understood about the real purpose of our meeting. "I appreciate you making time for this conversation, Bob," I replied as I followed him into the corner office that had always represented the pinnacle of corporate success within TechFlow's organizational hierarchy. "I think you're going to find our discussion quite illuminating." Bob's office reflected his personality and priorities with the same precision that a well-designed marketing campaign reflected its target audience. The mahogany desk commanded the center of the room, flanked by awards and photographs that documented his rise from software developer to successful entrepreneur. The view of downtown Austin through the floor-to-ceiling windows provided a constant reminder of the business empire he had built and the lifestyle his success had made possible. Jennifer closed the door behind us, creating the privacy that would be essential for the conversation I was about to initiate. Bob settled into his executive chair with the casual confidence of someone who believed he controlled every aspect of our interaction, while I took the visitor's chair across from his desk and placed my briefcase carefully on the floor beside me. "So," Bob said as he leaned back in his chair, "I assume you've had some time to think about the severance package we discussed on Friday. I hope you've realized that 6 months of salary continuation plus benefits is quite generous, especially in the current economic climate." The patronizing tone in his voice was exactly what I had expected, the kind of corporate arrogance that assumed former employees would be grateful for whatever crumbs their former employers chose to offer. Bob genuinely believed that his generosity was the most important factor in our conversation, that my response would be shaped primarily by financial desperation and professional insecurity. "Actually, Bob," I said as I opened my briefcase and removed the manila folder that contained the documents which would reshape our entire relationship, "I'm not here to discuss my severance package. I'm here to talk about a business relationship you probably don't know we have." Bob's expression shifted slightly, moving from confident condescension to mild curiosity as he tried to process what I might be referring to. His mind was clearly running through possibilities, searching for some connection between us that extended beyond my employment at TechFlow Solutions. "I'm not sure what you mean, Sarah. What kind of business relationship?" I opened the manila folder and removed the first document, a copy of the mortgage note that made me Bob's creditor, and placed it on his desk where he could see his own signature at the bottom of the page. The recognition didn't come immediately, his eyes scanning the legal language and financial details with the kind of confusion that meant he was struggling to understand the relevance of what I had just shown him. "Bob, I'd like you to meet your mortgage holder," I said, watching his expression carefully as the implications of what he was seeing began to register. "I own the $2.8 million debt secured by your house in Westlake Hills." The transformation in Bob's face was immediate and dramatic. Confusion gave way to disbelief, followed by a growing awareness that something fundamental had just changed about our relationship. His eyes moved from the document to my face and back again, as if he could somehow make sense of an impossible situation through repetition and careful examination. "This can't be right," Bob said, his voice carrying the kind of desperate denial that came with realizing that reality had just shifted in ways he never could have anticipated. "My mortgage is held by Lone Star Home Lending. I've been making payments to them for the past 18 months. Lone Star Home Lending sold your mortgage note to a private investment group 6 months ago," I explained with the patience of someone educating a student about concepts they should have understood before signing legal documents. "That investment group subsequently sold individual mortgage notes to private investors, including me." Bob picked up the document and examined it more closely, his eyes focusing on the legal language that detailed the transfer of his debt obligation from the original lender to me. The reality of what had happened was beginning to penetrate his initial shock, replaced by a growing understanding that his former employee now held significant power over his personal financial security. "You bought my mortgage?" Bob's voice had risen slightly, carrying a combination of disbelief and outrage that suggested he was beginning to grasp the implications of our changed relationship. "How is that even legal? How did you even know it was available for purchase?" "I didn't know it was your mortgage when I bought it," I replied truthfully, though I was careful not to mention that I had discovered his identity as the borrower months before he decided to fire me. The investment opportunity was presented to me as a high-value residential mortgage secured by luxury property in Westlake Hills. The borrower was listed as Harrison Property Trust, which didn't immediately connect to you in my mind. Bob's face was cycling through various shades of pale and flushed as his nervous system struggled to process the magnitude of what he was learning. The comfortable assumptions that had governed his understanding of power and control were crumbling around him, replaced by the terrifying realization that someone he had dismissed as powerless actually held enormous leverage over his lifestyle and financial stability. Sarah, this is highly irregular. There have to be ethics violations or conflicts of interest involved when an employee owns their boss's mortgage. I'm going to have our legal team review this situation immediately. Actually, Bob, I said as I pulled out another document from my folder, there's nothing unethical or illegal about private mortgage investment. You signed a promissory note that included specific language allowing the debt to be sold to third parties without your consent or notification. Every mortgage in America includes similar provisions. The second document was a copy of the original loan agreement that Bob had signed when refinancing his Westlake Hills mansion, with the relevant clauses highlighted in yellow to emphasize the legal foundation for everything that had transpired. His own signature appeared at the bottom of every page, acknowledging terms and conditions that he had obviously never read carefully. Furthermore, I continued, my employment status at TechFlow Solutions has no bearing on my rights as your creditor. Those are completely separate legal relationships governed by different laws and regulations. Bob was now leaning forward in his chair, his executive composure beginning to crack as he realized that his attempt to dismiss me as a powerless former employee had backfired in spectacular fashion. The woman he had fired to make room for his incompetent daughter was now in a position to demand financial disclosures, property inspections, and potentially accelerate his entire mortgage balance. What exactly do you want, Sarah? Bob's tone had shifted from condescending confidence to barely controlled anxiety. If this is some kind of attempt to get your job back through financial blackmail, I can assure you that TechFlow Solutions doesn't negotiate under those kinds of circumstances. I want you to understand the full scope of the decision you made on Friday, I replied, maintaining the calm professional tone that seemed to be driving him toward panic more effectively than any show of anger could have accomplished. You fired someone who now controls $2.8 million of your personal debt, and you gave that person's job to someone whose incompetence is already damaging your company's marketing effectiveness. The reference to Emma's performance seemed to hit Bob like an additional blow, reminding him that his nepotistic decision was creating problems on multiple levels simultaneously. His daughter's inexperience wasn't just a theoretical concern, it was actively undermining the marketing programs that had been driving TechFlow's business growth for the past several years. Emma's doing fine, Bob said, though his tone lacked conviction and suggested that he was already aware of the problems her transition had created. She's implementing innovative approaches that will position us better for future growth opportunities. Bob, I said as I pulled out the third document from my folder, this is a report from Kevin Park, my mortgage broker, detailing my rights as your note holder. Would you like me to explain what those rights include? The document outlined the comprehensive legal powers that came with holding Bob's mortgage, including the right to demand annual property inspections, review his financial disclosures, approve any modifications to the property, and exercise first refusal rights if he ever decided to sell. More ominously, it detailed the circumstances that could trigger acceleration of the loan balance, requiring immediate payment of the entire remaining debt. Bob's eyes scanned the document with growing alarm as he realized that his former employee now had legal standing to intrude into virtually every aspect of his financial and personal life. The privacy and autonomy that he had always taken for granted as fundamental rights were actually subject to the approval and oversight of someone he had just tried to discard as irrelevant to his future success. This is insane, Bob said, his voice now carrying genuine desperation. You can't seriously be planning to use my mortgage as some kind of weapon against me. That would be harassment and abuse of the legal system. I'm planning to exercise my legitimate rights as your creditor, I replied calmly. For example, I'm considering scheduling an annual property inspection to ensure that my $2.8 million investment is being properly maintained and insured. The prospect of his former employee conducting an inspection of his private residence was clearly horrifying to Bob, representing a violation of the boundaries between his professional and personal life that he had never imagined could be breached. The Westlake Hills mansion was his sanctuary, the place where he could escape from the demands of running TechFlow Solutions and enjoy the lifestyle his success had made possible. Sarah, be reasonable, Bob pleaded, his executive authority completely dissolved in the face of his growing awareness that I held all the cards in our relationship. What do you want from me? Money? A better severance package? A recommendation letter that will help you find another position? I want you to understand that firing competent people to benefit your family members carries consequences you never considered, I said as I reached for the final document in my folder. And I want you to see what Emma's innovative approaches are actually accomplishing in the marketing department you handed her. The last document was a report that Tyler Johnson had prepared for me, detailing the chaos that Emma's inexperience had created within the marketing department during her first 3 days as director. Client complaints about delayed campaigns, team members requesting transfers to other departments, and a complete breakdown in the lead generation programs that had been driving TechFlow's revenue growth. "This is confidential company information," Bob said as he recognized the internal report format, though his objection lacked any real authority. "How did you obtain access to proprietary business documents?" Tyler's report had been prepared as a personal favor, documenting the professional dysfunction that Emma's appointment had created within hours of her taking control of the marketing department. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, demonstrating exactly how poor Bob's judgment had been in prioritizing family relationships over business competence. Emma's restructuring of the marketing department has resulted in a 40% drop in lead generation during her first week, I said, pointing to the specific metrics that told the story of her incompetence. 3 major clients have called to complain about missed deadlines and inconsistent messaging. Jessica Rodriguez has submitted a transfer request to get out of marketing, and 2 other team members have indicated they're considering resignation. Bob's face had gone completely pale as he absorbed the scope of the damage that his daughter's inexperience was inflicting on the company he had spent 15 years building. The nepotistic decision that had seemed so reasonable on Friday was revealing itself as a catastrophic error in judgment that threatened both his business and his personal financial security. "The problems in marketing can be addressed," Bob said weakly, though his tone suggested he was beginning to realize that Emma's limitations were more fundamental than simple inexperience that could be overcome with time and training. "Can they?" I asked, leaning forward slightly to emphasize the seriousness of what I was about to propose. "Because I'm not convinced that Emma has the capability to lead a complex marketing operation, and as your mortgage holder, I'm concerned about any business decisions that might affect your ability to service your debt obligations." The implication was clear and legally defensible. If Emma's incompetence damaged TechFlow's business performance enough to impact Bob's income and financial stability, that could justify a review of his mortgage terms and potentially trigger acceleration of the loan balance. Bob was now gripping the edge of his desk with enough force to make his knuckles white, his mind clearly racing through the various scenarios that my position as his creditor made possible. The comfortable assumptions about power and control that had governed his decision to fire me were collapsing under the weight of financial reality and legal consequences he had never anticipated. "What do you want me to do, Sarah?" Bob's voice was barely above a whisper, the confident executive who had dismissed me on Friday, now reduced to someone pleading for mercy from a former employee who had become his most important creditor. "I want you to make this right," I said, standing up from my chair and gathering the documents that had just transformed our relationship forever. "And I want you to understand that some people have more power than you ever imagined, even when you think you've reduced them to powerless former employees." The meeting that Bob had expected to be a routine discussion about severance terms had become a devastating lesson about the hidden vulnerabilities that successful people often carry without realizing how those vulnerabilities could be exploited by someone with the knowledge and determination to do so. As I walked toward his office door, Bob called out with the desperation of someone who realized that his world had just been turned upside down by forces he never saw coming. "Sarah, wait, let's talk about this. There has to be a way to work something out that benefits everyone involved." I paused at the door and turned back to face him, seeing the fear and uncertainty that had replaced his earlier confidence and condescension. The man who had fired me to benefit his daughter was now at my mercy, dependent on my goodwill for his financial security and lifestyle maintenance. "There is a way to work something out, Bob," I said with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "But it's going to require you to acknowledge some fundamental truths about competence, consequences, and the people you choose to underestimate." The door closed behind me with a soft click, leaving Bob Harrison alone with the mortgage documents, that had just made his former employee the most powerful person in his personal financial life. Thursday morning brought news that rippled through TechFlow Solutions like an earthquake reshaping the corporate landscape. Bob Harrison had called an emergency board meeting for 10 o'clock, and word was spreading quickly through the office that major organizational changes were about to be announced. I received this information through a text message from Tyler Johnson, whose position in the software development department gave him access to the kind of internal communications that revealed when something significant was about to unfold. David found me in our home office, surrounded by real estate investment documents and legal paperwork that told the story of how a routine property acquisition had become the foundation for corporate justice. His expression showed the mixture of amazement and concern that had become familiar over the past week, as he watched his wife transform from fired employee to financial power broker. "Sarah, Tyler just called," David said as he settled into the chair across from my desk. "Bob's called an emergency board meeting, and there are rumors that he's going to announce major changes to the executive team structure. Do you think yesterday's conversation had the impact you were hoping for?" "I think Bob Harrison spent last night realizing that his decision to fire me was the most expensive mistake of his professional career," I replied, though I was careful not to reveal the full scope of what I had planned for the final phase of my strategy. Sometimes people need to experience consequences before they understand the true cost of their choices. The emergency board meeting was scheduled to begin exactly 24 hours after my revelation about owning Bob's mortgage, giving him just enough time to fully comprehend the implications of our changed relationship, but not enough time to develop any meaningful strategy for mitigating the damage his nepotistic decision had created. Kevin Park had agreed to attend the meeting as my representative, armed with documentation that would formalize my position as Bob's creditor and establish the legal framework for ongoing oversight of his financial obligations. The presence of a professional mortgage broker at a corporate board meeting would send an unmistakable message about the seriousness of the situation Bob had created for himself. My phone rang at exactly 9:30, and Jennifer's voice carried the kind of professional strain that suggested TechFlow's executive offices had become a very stressful place to work over the past 18 hours. "Sarah, this is Jennifer from Bob's office. Bob was wondering if you might be available to join the board meeting this morning. He said there are some matters that require your input and expertise." The invitation was carefully worded to avoid acknowledging the power dynamics that had shifted so dramatically since our conversation the previous afternoon. Bob was trying to maintain the illusion that he was extending a professional courtesy, rather than capitulating to someone who now held enormous leverage over his personal and corporate future. "I'll be there," I replied, though I had no intention of making this easy for him. "Please let the board know that Kevin Park from Lone Star Home Lending will be accompanying me to discuss some financial matters that have become relevant to TechFlow's executive structure." The drive to TechFlow Solutions felt like a victory lap, the familiar route to the office building now representing a journey toward vindication rather than employment. The woman who had been discarded as a disposable employee was returning as someone with the power to reshape the entire corporate hierarchy through strategic application of financial leverage and professional competence. The lobby of TechFlow Solutions buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that accompanied major organizational upheavals. Employees clustered in small groups, their conversations focused on speculation about what changes were coming and how those changes might affect their own positions. Within the company structure, Marcus, the security guard, looked up with obvious confusion as I approached his desk, accompanied by Kevin Park, whose professional attire and briefcase clearly identified him as someone involved in serious business matters. "Ms. Mitchell, I wasn't expecting to see you back so soon," Marcus said as he prepared visitor badges for both Kevin and me. "Mr. Harrison's assistant said you're here for the board meeting?" "That's right, Marcus. We're here to discuss some important financial matters with the executive team." The elevator ride to the 8th floor was filled with the kind of anticipatory tension that preceded moments of significant change. Kevin reviewed his documentation one final time, ensuring that every aspect of Bob's mortgage obligations was clearly articulated and legally defensible. The papers in his briefcase represented the financial foundation for everything that was about to unfold in the boardroom. The conference room was already full when we arrived, with TechFlow's 5-member board of directors seated around the mahogany table that had witnessed countless strategic decisions over the company's 15-year history. Bob sat at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone who had spent the night confronting the consequences of his own poor judgment. Patricia Williams, the board chairwoman and former federal prosecutor, looked up as Kevin and I entered the room. Her sharp eyes took in the professional dynamic between us, immediately recognizing that this meeting was going to be unlike anything she had experienced during her tenure on TechFlow's board. "Sarah, thank you for joining us on such short notice," Patricia said, her tone carrying the careful neutrality that experienced board members used when navigating sensitive corporate situations. Bob indicated that there are some important matters we need to discuss regarding recent organizational changes. "Before we begin," I said as Kevin and I took seats at the conference table, "I'd like to introduce Kevin Park, who represents my interests in some financial matters that have become relevant to this discussion." Kevin opened his briefcase and placed copies of Bob's mortgage documentation in front of each board member, the legal papers creating an immediate shift in the room's atmosphere, as the directors realized they were dealing with something far more complex than routine personnel decisions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kevin began in the professional tone he used for presenting complex financial information to sophisticated audiences, "I'm here to discuss a mortgage note held by Ms. Mitchell that creates certain legal obligations and oversight responsibilities related to Mr. Harrison's personal financial circumstances." The board members exchanged glances as they reviewed the mortgage documents, their expressions showing varying degrees of surprise and concern as they began to understand the implications of what they were seeing. The revelation that their CEO's personal debt was controlled by a recently terminated employee created obvious conflicts of interest and potential liability issues that extended far beyond normal corporate governance concerns. Dr. Michael Torres, TechFlow's longest-serving board member, looked up from the mortgage documentation with the kind of focused attention that had served him well during 40 years of business leadership. "Ms. Mitchell, are you saying that you own Mr. Harrison's mortgage as a private investment?" "That's correct," I replied, maintaining the calm professional demeanor that seemed to be having maximum psychological impact on Bob. "I purchased the mortgage note 6 months ago as part of my real estate investment portfolio, not knowing at the time that Mr. Harrison was the borrower." Patricia Williams was already taking notes with the methodical precision of someone who understood the legal complexities that mortgage note ownership could create in corporate contexts. "Ms. Mitchell, this puts the board in a rather unique position. Can you help us understand how this financial relationship affects the recent personnel decisions that brought us here today?" "Certainly. When Mr. Harrison fired me on Friday to hire his daughter, he created a situation where someone he had dismissed as a powerless employee actually holds significant leverage over his personal financial security. As his creditor, I now have legal rights that include property inspection, financial disclosure review, and potential loan acceleration under certain circumstances." The board members were now fully engaged, their attention focused on the intersection of corporate governance and personal financial obligations that none of them had ever encountered in their professional experience. The comfortable assumptions about power and control that typically governed executive decision-making were being challenged by circumstances that revealed hidden vulnerabilities in their CEO's position. Bob finally spoke, his voice carrying the strain of someone who had spent 18 hours trying to find a solution to an impossible situation. "The board needs to understand that this puts TechFlow in a very difficult position. Having an employee hold the CEO's mortgage creates obvious conflicts of interest that could affect business decisions and corporate governance." "Former employee," I corrected, emphasizing the distinction that made Bob's situation even more problematic. "You terminated my employment, remember?" The question now is whether TechFlow's board is comfortable with a CEO whose personal financial stability is controlled by someone he treated as disposable. Linda Chen, the board's human resources specialist, had been reviewing Emma's personnel file with obvious concern. "Mr. Harrison, I need to address some issues that have emerged regarding Emma Harrison's performance in the marketing director role. We've received multiple complaints from clients and employees about significant problems with campaign management and departmental leadership." The transition to discussing Emma's incompetence was perfectly timed. demonstrating how Bob's nepotistic decision had created problems on multiple levels simultaneously. His attempt to benefit his daughter had not only made him vulnerable to financial pressure from me, but had also damaged TechFlow's business operations in ways that threatened the company's revenue and reputation. What kind of problems are we talking about? Patricia asked, her prosecutorial instincts focused on gathering comprehensive information about the scope of the dysfunction Bob's decision had created. Linda consulted her notes with the grim expression of an HR professional documenting serious performance failures. 3 major clients have complained about missed deadlines and inconsistent messaging since Emma took over the marketing department. Our lead generation has dropped by 40% in 1 week. Jessica Rodriguez, one of our most valuable marketing professionals, has requested an immediate transfer out of the department. Robert Martinez, the board's financial oversight specialist, leaned forward with growing concern. Linda, can you give us specific examples of these client complaints? We need to understand the potential revenue impact of these issues. Certainly, Linda replied, consulting a second folder she had brought to the meeting. DataCore Systems, one of our largest enterprise clients, called yesterday to express frustration about a campaign launch that was supposed to go live Monday, but has been delayed indefinitely. Emma apparently decided that their approved messaging was too traditional and wanted to completely restructure their campaign around what she called authentic engagement strategies. The board members were taking notes furiously now, recognizing that Emma's inexperience was creating liability issues that could affect TechFlow's contractual obligations and client relationships. The nepotistic hiring that Bob had thought would be a simple favor to his daughter was revealing itself as a complex business crisis with legal and financial ramifications. What about the lead generation problems you mentioned? Dr. Torres asked, his experience in technology business development making him particularly sensitive to issues that could affect revenue pipeline management. Emma discontinued what she called outdated email marketing programs and automated nurturing sequences that Sarah had developed over the past 3 years, Linda explained, her tone showing frustration with having to document such obvious management failures. She replaced them with what she termed organic social media engagement strategies that focus on building community rather than generating qualified leads. The translation was obvious to everyone in the room. Emma had destroyed proven revenue-generating systems in favor of social media tactics that might be appropriate for consumer brands, but were completely inadequate for enterprise software marketing. The sophisticated lead nurturing programs that had been driving TechFlow's business growth were being replaced by approaches that demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of B2B sales cycles and decision-making processes. Kevin chose this moment to introduce additional documentation that would formalize the legal framework surrounding my position as Bob's creditor. Board members, I have prepared a comprehensive analysis of Ms. Mitchell's rights as Mr. Harrison's mortgage holder, including specific circumstances that could trigger review or acceleration of his loan obligations. He distributed a detailed legal analysis that outlined the various scenarios under which my position as Bob's creditor could become relevant to his continued employment and compensation at TechFlow. The document was thorough and professionally prepared, demonstrating that we had approached this situation with the same level of strategic planning that would be expected in any major corporate transaction. Patricia Williams studied the legal analysis with the focused attention of someone who understood the implications of what she was reading. Mr. Park, this document suggests that significant changes to Mr. Harrison's employment status or compensation could trigger acceleration of the entire mortgage balance. Is that your understanding of the legal framework? That's correct, Kevin replied with the confidence of someone who had spent years navigating complex real estate law. Ms. Mitchell's position as note holder gives her certain rights and protections that are designed to ensure the security of her investment. Any events that could potentially affect Mr. Harrison's ability to service his debt obligations would justify a review of the loan terms and potentially trigger acceleration requiring immediate full payment. The acceleration clause was the nuclear option that could force Bob to immediately repay his entire $2.8 million mortgage balance if circumstances changed in ways that affected his creditworthiness or ability to meet his payment obligations. The board members understood immediately that this created a complex web of interdependencies between Bob's personal financial obligations and his corporate responsibilities. Dr. Torres was the first to fully grasp the strategic implications of what we were discussing. So if the board were to take any action regarding Mr. Harrison's employment or compensation, that could potentially create a financial crisis that would affect his ability to maintain his mortgage obligations? Precisely, Kevin confirmed. Ms. Mitchell's investment security is partially dependent on Mr. Harrison's continued ability to generate sufficient income to service his debt. Any corporate decisions that materially affect his financial stability could justify protective actions on behalf of the note holder. Bob's face had gone completely pale as he realized that his position at TechFlow was now inextricably linked to my financial interests and legal rights as his creditor. The comfortable separation between his personal and professional life had been eliminated by the mortgage relationship, creating a situation where his former employee's approval would be required for any significant changes to his corporate status. Robert Martinez was studying the financial implications with the analytical precision that had made him valuable to TechFlow's board oversight responsibilities. Ms. Mitchell, given the complexity of this situation, what would you consider an appropriate resolution that protects both your investment interests and TechFlow's operational needs? The question I had been hoping someone would ask. The opening that would allow me to present the comprehensive solution I had developed during my week of strategic planning. The board was essentially inviting me to propose the terms for resolving a crisis that Bob's poor judgment had created. I believe there are several interconnected issues that need to be addressed, I replied, maintaining the professional tone that had served me so well throughout this process. First, TechFlow needs experienced marketing leadership that can restore the programs and client relationships that have been damaged during the past week. Second, the company needs improved governance policies to prevent future nepotistic hiring decisions that could create similar crises. Third, Mr. Harrison needs to understand that his personal financial obligations now require more careful consideration of how his corporate decisions might affect other stakeholders. Patricia Williams was nodding thoughtfully as she considered the implications of what I was proposing. Ms. Mitchell, are you suggesting that you would be interested in returning to TechFlow in a leadership capacity that could address these marketing and governance challenges? I would be open to discussing a senior executive role that reflects both my demonstrated capabilities and the unique position I now hold in relation to TechFlow's leadership structure, I replied carefully. However, any such arrangement would need to include immediate resolution of the marketing department's leadership crisis and implementation of comprehensive governance improvements. The negotiation that followed was unlike anything any of the board members had experienced during their corporate careers. The standard power dynamics that typically governed executive hiring and compensation discussions had been completely transformed by the mortgage relationship, creating a situation where the candidate held more leverage than the hiring authority. Linda Chen was the first to address the practical implications of what was being discussed. Ms. Mitchell, if the board were to offer you a senior executive position, what would you recommend regarding Emma Harrison's current role in the marketing department? Emma's position as marketing director is untenable given her performance during the past week and the damage that has been done to client relationships and departmental morale, I replied directly. She would need to be transitioned to a role that better matches her current capabilities and allows her to develop professional skills without threatening TechFlow's revenue or reputation. Dr. Torres was taking extensive notes as he considered the operational implications of the changes we were discussing. Sarah, assuming we could reach agreement on your return to TechFlow, what would your priorities be for rebuilding the marketing department and restoring client confidence? The question allowed me to demonstrate the strategic thinking and operational expertise that had made me successful in my previous role, while also showing the board that I had developed comprehensive plans for addressing the problems that Bob's nepotistic decision had created. My immediate priorities would be restoring the lead generation programs that Emma discontinued, rebuilding relationships with clients who have been affected by the recent disruptions, and implementing new departmental processes that prevent future performance failures. I would also recommend expanding the marketing leadership team to ensure adequate succession planning and cross-training. Robert Martinez was particularly interested in the financial implications of the restoration efforts I was proposing. What kind of budget and timeline would be required to repair the damage that's been done and return the marketing department to its previous performance levels? Based on my analysis of the problems that have emerged during the past week, I would estimate approximately 6 months to fully restore lead generation performance and client confidence, with additional budget allocation for expanded staff training and system improvements. The investment would be substantial, but the cost of continued dysfunction would be much higher. Kevin had been monitoring the discussion carefully, waiting for the appropriate moment to introduce the legal framework that would govern any agreement between TechFlow and me given the mortgage relationship. Board members, I should point out that any employment agreement with Ms. Mitchell would need to include specific provisions addressing the intersection of her executive responsibilities and her position as Mr. Harrison's creditor. The legal complexities were significant, requiring careful structuring to ensure that my dual roles as corporate executive and mortgage holder didn't create conflicts of interest that could expose TechFlow to liability or regulatory scrutiny. Kevin's expertise in both real estate law and corporate finance made him invaluable for navigating these unprecedented circumstances. Patricia Williams was already thinking through the governance implications of what we were discussing. Mr. Park, what kind of legal framework would be necessary to manage the relationship between Ms. Mitchell's executive responsibilities and her financial interests in Mr. Harrison's mortgage? We would need to establish clear protocols for decision-making processes that could affect Mr. Harrison's compensation or employment status, Kevin explained. Ms. Mitchell would need to recuse herself from any board discussions or votes that could impact her position as mortgage holder, and there would need to be independent oversight of any situations where her dual roles might create conflicts. The conversation continued for another hour as the board members worked through the various legal, financial, and operational issues that my proposed return to TechFlow would entail. The complexity of the situation required careful consideration of corporate governance principles, employment law, and real estate regulations that none of them had ever encountered in combination. Bob had remained largely silent during the strategic discussions, his usual executive authority completely undermined by the revelation that his personal financial security was controlled by someone he had tried to discard. The confident CEO who had fired me 6 days earlier was now dependent on my goodwill for both his mortgage stability and his company's operational recovery. As the formal meeting concluded, Patricia Williams requested a private consultation with the board members to discuss the unprecedented situation they were facing. Kevin and I were asked to wait in Bob's office while the directors deliberated about how to proceed with circumstances that had no precedent in their collective corporate experience. The wait in Bob's office was surreal, sitting in the space where he had once exercised absolute authority over my professional future, while now holding enormous leverage over his personal financial security. The expensive artwork and executive furniture that had once symbolized his corporate success now seemed like symbols of vulnerability and dependence. Bob entered his office 30 minutes later, his expression showing the hollow defeat of someone who had realized that his world had been permanently altered by forces he never saw coming. The comfortable assumptions about power and control that had governed his approach to personnel management had been shattered by the intersection of nepotism and mortgage ownership. "Sarah," Bob said as he settled heavily into his executive chair, "I think we both know where this is heading. The board is going to offer you whatever position and compensation package you want, and I'm going to have to accept whatever role they think is appropriate for someone who made such a catastrophic error in judgment." The acknowledgement of defeat was complete and unconditional. Exactly what I had been working towards since learning about my mortgage ownership 6 months earlier. Bob Harrison, the CEO who had fired me to benefit his incompetent daughter, was now at my mercy for both his corporate future and his personal financial stability. "I don't want to destroy you, Bob," I replied with genuine sincerity. "I want you to understand that competent people deserve respect, and that family relationships shouldn't override professional qualifications. What happened to me could happen to anyone who threatens someone's personal interests, and that's not acceptable in a professional environment." The conversation that followed was unlike any interaction Bob and I had ever had during my 8 years at TechFlow. For the first time, he listened without the condescending attitude that had characterized his management style, recognizing that his former employee had become someone whose opinions and decisions would shape his future in ways he had never imagined possible. Patricia Williams returned to Bob's office an hour later with the board's decision, her expression showing the careful neutrality of someone who had navigated complex corporate crises throughout her distinguished legal career. The unprecedented nature of our situation had required creative solutions that balanced competing interests and legal obligations. "Sarah," Patricia said as she settled into one of the chairs facing Bob's desk, "the board has unanimously agreed to offer you the position of Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President, with expanded responsibilities for corporate governance and strategic planning. Your compensation package would include equity participation and performance bonuses that reflect the seniority and importance of the role. The offer exceeded my expectations, representing not just a restoration of my previous authority but a significant elevation that acknowledged both my professional capabilities and the unique circumstances that had brought us to this point. The title of Executive Vice President would make me the second highest-ranking executive at TechFlow, with responsibilities that extended far beyond marketing into overall corporate strategy and governance. Additionally, Patricia continued, the board has approved immediate changes to our corporate governance policies to prevent future nepotistic hiring decisions and ensure that all personnel actions are based on merit and business requirements, rather than personal relationships. The governance improvements were exactly what I had hoped for, representing systemic changes that would protect other employees from the kind of arbitrary treatment that Bob had attempted to impose on me. The policies would establish objective criteria for hiring and promotion decisions, with oversight mechanisms that prevented individual executives from making personnel decisions that served their personal interests rather than the company's needs. What about Emma's situation? I asked, genuinely concerned about how the transition would affect someone whose only crime was accepting a position she wasn't qualified to hold. Emma will be offered a junior-level position in our customer relations department, where her enthusiasm and social media skills can be channeled productively while she develops professional experience, Patricia replied. The position includes comprehensive training and mentoring to help her build the capabilities needed for future advancement based on merit rather than family connections. The solution was elegant and humane, providing Emma with legitimate professional development opportunities while removing her from a role where her inexperience had been damaging the company's operations. The transition would be handled with dignity and respect, emphasizing learning and growth rather than punishment for accepting a position she never should have been offered. Bob's role as CEO will continue, Patricia said, turning to address him directly, but with modified reporting structures and oversight responsibilities that reflect the board's concerns about the judgment errors that created this situation. Your compensation and decision-making authority will be reviewed and adjusted to ensure better alignment with corporate governance best practices. The message was clear, without being explicitly punitive. Bob would retain his title and position, but his authority would be constrained by new oversight mechanisms and governance structures that reflected the board's decreased confidence in his judgment and decision-making capabilities. Kevin was invited back into the discussion to address the legal framework that would govern my dual roles as corporate executive and mortgage holder. The solution he had developed was comprehensive and professionally crafted, establishing clear protocols for managing potential conflicts of interest, while protecting both TechFlow's operational needs and my legitimate rights as Bob's creditor. The legal structure includes recusal procedures for any corporate decisions that could affect Mr. Harrison's compensation or employment status, Kevin explained to the board. Ms. Mitchell would be excluded from those discussions and votes, with independent board oversight ensuring that her mortgage holder interests don't influence corporate governance decisions. The framework also established annual review procedures for the mortgage relationship, ensuring that any changes in Bob's financial circumstances or employment status would be properly evaluated according to the terms of his loan agreement. The reviews would be conducted by independent financial consultants to maintain objectivity and prevent conflicts of interest. By late Thursday afternoon, the transformation was complete. The woman who had been fired 6 days earlier for inconvenient competence had returned as the most powerful executive in the company, armed with both corporate authority and financial leverage that made her position virtually unassailable. Emma Harrison's brief tenure as marketing director ended with a carefully managed transition that emphasized learning and professional development rather than failure and disappointment. Her enthusiasm and social media expertise found appropriate application in customer relations, where her authentic engagement style proved valuable for building brand loyalty and client satisfaction. The marketing department was rebuilt around the principles of competence and accountability that had been abandoned during Emma's week of leadership. Jessica Rodriguez accepted a promotion to senior marketing manager, while the lead generation programs and strategic campaigns that had been disrupted were restored and enhanced with additional resources and executive support. Friday morning brought the first staff meeting under the new organizational structure, with the marketing team gathered in the conference room where Bob had fired me exactly 1 week earlier. The transformation felt both dramatic and inevitable, as if the universe had corrected an imbalance that never should have been allowed to exist. Jessica spoke for the entire team when she expressed relief that the department would be returning to the strategic approaches and professional standards that had made TechFlow's marketing efforts so successful. The week of chaos under Emma's leadership had demonstrated how quickly inexperience could destroy years of careful building and relationship development. The client recovery efforts began immediately, with personal calls to every account that had been affected by the disruptions during Emma's tenure. The conversations were challenging but productive, with most clients expressing understanding about the temporary leadership transition and confidence in TechFlow's commitment to restoring service quality. DataCore Systems, the enterprise client whose campaign had been arbitrarily restructured by Emma, agreed to proceed with their original marketing plan after receiving personal assurances from me about project management and deliverable timelines. The conversation demonstrated how quickly professional relationships could be restored when approached with competence and accountability. Within 2 weeks, the lead generation programs that Emma had discontinued were fully operational again, with performance metrics showing rapid recovery toward historical levels. The sophisticated automation and nurturing sequences that had taken years to develop and optimize were restored with improvements based on lessons learned during the disruption period. The governance policy improvements were implemented with equal speed and thoroughness, establishing objective criteria for all hiring and promotion decisions, and creating oversight mechanisms that prevented individual executives from making personnel choices based on personal relationships rather than business requirements. Bob Harrison's adjustment to the new organizational structure was gradual but genuine, as he began to understand how his nepotistic decision had undermined the principles of merit and accountability that should govern corporate leadership. The humbling experience of having his authority constrained by governance policies seemed to create genuine reflection about his management approach and decision-making processes. The mortgage relationship continued to function smoothly, with Bob making his monthly payments on time and maintaining the property according to the terms of his loan agreement. The psychological impact of knowing that his former employee controlled his personal financial security had fundamentally changed his approach to personnel management and corporate governance. 3 months after the crisis, TechFlow Solutions had not only recovered from the damage Emma's inexperience had created, but had achieved record quarterly performance that exceeded all previous benchmarks. The marketing department's restored programs were generating higher lead quality and conversion rates than ever before, while the improved governance policies had enhanced overall operational efficiency throughout the company. The industry recognition that followed was gratifying but not surprising, with TechFlow receiving awards for marketing innovation and corporate governance that reflected the transformation that had occurred under the new leadership structure. The company that had nearly been damaged by nepotism and poor judgment had become a model for ethical leadership and professional excellence. Emma Harrison's development in the customer relations department exceeded everyone's expectations, as her enthusiasm and authentic communication style proved valuable for building client loyalty and satisfaction. The professional training and mentoring she received helped her understand the difference between social media engagement and corporate responsibility, preparing her for future advancement based on demonstrated competence rather than family connections. 6 months after Bob's catastrophic decision to fire me, TechFlow Solutions had been completely transformed into an organization that prioritized merit over relationships and accountability over convenience. The woman who had been discarded as a disposable employee had become the architect of a corporate culture that protected competent people from arbitrary treatment and personal bias. The mortgage payments continued without interruption, a monthly reminder to Bob Harrison that some decisions carry consequences that extend far beyond the workplace, and that some people have more power than their positions might suggest. The man who had once believed he could discard employees without consequences had learned that competence and strategic thinking could triumph over arrogance and nepotism when combined with determination and hidden resources. 1 year later, the transformation remained complete and permanent. TechFlow Solutions had established itself as one of Austin's most respected employers, known for promoting talent based on merit and maintaining ethical leadership standards that attracted top performers from throughout the technology industry. Emma Harrison had been promoted twice within the customer relations department, earning recognition for her innovative approaches to client engagement and brand building that matched her natural abilities and interests. Her success demonstrated that professional development and appropriate role placement could transform family favoritism into legitimate career advancement. Bob Harrison had evolved into a more thoughtful and collaborative leader, his experience with governance constraints and external oversight creating genuine improvements in his management style and decision-making processes. The humbling experience of losing control over his personal financial security to a former employee had taught him valuable lessons about respect, competence, and the interconnected nature of personal and professional relationships. The marketing department had become TechFlow's most successful operational unit, generating revenue growth and client satisfaction metrics that established new industry benchmarks for enterprise software marketing. The programs and strategies that had been nearly destroyed by 1 week of inexperienced leadership had been rebuilt into something more robust and effective than ever before. The governance policies that emerged from the crisis had been adopted by other companies as models for preventing nepotistic hiring and ensuring merit-based personnel decisions. The framework developed at TechFlow demonstrated how corporate boards could maintain accountability while protecting competent employees from arbitrary treatment by individual executives. The real estate investment portfolio that had made the entire transformation possible continued to grow and prosper, with mortgage note holdings that provided steady returns while creating strategic opportunities for influencing positive change in corporate environments. The lesson that competent people often have hidden resources and capabilities had been learned by business leaders throughout Austin's technology community. The woman who had been fired for inconvenient competence had proven that justice was possible when determination was combined with strategic thinking and hidden advantages that arrogant people never saw coming. The transformation from victim to victor was complete, permanent, and deeply satisfying on both personal and professional levels. Bob Harrison's monthly mortgage payments continued as a tangible reminder that some choices have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment, and that some people have the resources and determination to ensure that justice ultimately prevails over nepotism, arrogance, and abuse of power. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.